right, well today we've got Eli James. I've talked about it before, Anglo-Saxon Israel.com, and he's going to talk on who the modern day Israelites are, or the Jews, if you kind of distinguish between the two. And so I'll bring him up. Come on up.
Okay. Thank you, David. As David was saying, my website is www.anglo-saxonisrael.com, and on that website there are many articles and videos referencing the Israelite people and the Jewish people and the distinctions between them. Now, of course, the vast majority of people today believe that Israel and the Jews are the same people, and that has never been true. That is, in fact, one of the biggest lies of history, namely the Jewish claim that they are the Israel of the Bible. In fact, we'll be referencing many quotations from Scripture, such as Revelation 2:9, Revelation 3:9, and 12:9, all of which tell us, for example, Revelation 2:9 says that there is a people who say they are Jews, are not, and do lie, but are the synagogue of Satan. And so we have to understand that there's great deception, monumental deception that has been taking place in the last 2,000 years, and we can say very specifically in the last 2,125 years, that a group of people who are non-Israelites, in fact, are Edomites and Canaanites, who have been masquerading, who have been pretending to be Israel for the last 2 millennia. And it's because of this extensive deception, this extensively long period of time, during which these Edomite Jews, and we'll be talking about the Edomite Jews throughout most of this video, that these Edomite Jews have been pretending to be Israel by, number one, adopting the culture, some aspects of the culture of ancient Israel and the house of Judah, and also by having claimed to author the Old Testament. The Old Testament, of course, was written by Hebrews, by Judahites primarily, although other members of other tribes were involved in that as well. But I can say categorically that not a single word of the Bible was written by a Jew. And that's because the Jews aren't Israelites and never were Israelites. In fact, the Sephardic Jews, as we're going to find out today, were actually members of the Canaanite Edomite tribe of Idumea, and related peoples who were always at war with Israel. And we're going to be quoting prophecies from the Old Testament that state that the Edomites would one day covet the name of Israel and covet their land and take it over. And those are historical facts that occurred just before the days of Christ. The Edomites did take over. They usurped the throne of Judah, and the man who did that was Herod, known as Herod the Great. And he was actually installed by his father Antipater and Julius Caesar. It was a coup. It was a usurpation of the kingdom of Judah. And that explains why Herod was so anxious to kill baby Jesus, because Herod, being an Edomite, knew very well that Jesus was the true heir to the throne of Judah, and that's why the Judahites were hated by the Edomites at this. And these Edomites knew that they were culturally different from the Israelites of the house of Judah in Judea in those days. In fact, the Judahite women protested on virtually a daily basis against King Herod, because they said, hey, Herod, he's not one of us, he's not a Judahite, he's an Edomite. And this aspect of the history of Judea during the intertestamental period and leading up to the days of Christ is utterly ignored by virtually all historians who are, and all biblical theologians, who are simply either unaware of the actual history of these days, or who are actually covering up for the synagogue of Satan. So the major thrust of this video is going to be about the Edomite Jews, those Jews who lived side by side with the Israelites throughout biblical history. And we can demonstrate that these are two separate groups of people, two lines of descent. The Bible makes it very clear that there are two lines of descent and also continuous enemies throughout the existence of both lines of descent. And that continues even down to this day, as we will show. But before we get into the subject of the Edomites, we have to clear up one thing. In Christian identity, such pastors as Dr. Wesley Swift and Bertrand Comparet have been saying for decades that the Jewish people are not the Israel of the Bible. They're not the Israel of God. They're not the Israel of Yahweh. And that there are two distinct groups of people blended into one people, namely the Ashkenazi Jews and the Sephardic Jews. And typically, if you ask a Jew, well, what's the difference between a Sephardic Jew and an Ashkenazi Jew? They say, well, the Ashkenazis are European Jews, and the Sephardic Jews are Spanish Jews. But that doesn't explain where they came from, okay? To say that the Sephardic Jews came from Spain is not to explain where the Spanish Jews themselves came from. Well, we know they came from the Middle East. They came from the Middle East, they came from Palestine, many of whom wandered across northern Africa and actually were in cahoots with the Moors against the Christians of Spain and were instigating the Moors to attack Christian Spain. So those Spanish Jews were actually the Sephardic Jews who came from the Middle East, who were actually the survivors of the Roman army's destruction of Jerusalem and the army under Titus, the destruction of the Temple of Jerusalem, and many of the of the wars that the Jews fought were against the Romans. So it was the Romans who destroyed the Temple and burnt it to the ground, and basically spread the Jewish people from there far and wide. Okay, so that's the Jewish diaspora or dispersion, as they call it, a diaspora. But we know, and I want to refer you to other of our videos, the Migration of Israel videos, which prove that the 10 northern tribes, with large numbers of the 2 southern tribes, that is Judah and Benjamin, which accompanied them into Europe, they became known as the Caucasian people, and the Caucasian people are all descended from the 12 tribes of Israel. And that's covered in other videos on this website and on anglo-saxonisrael.com. So today, in this section, in this very first introduction, we're going to be talking about the Ashkenazim primarily and who they are. And I'm going to make some quotes here from Jews and from historians who tell us who these Ashkenazim really are. And they're not Israel. I can say categorically, without fear of contradiction, that the Ashkenazi Jews have no Israelite blood, no Judahite blood, no Hebrew blood, no Shemitic blood. That's right. The Ashkenazi Jews, who are up to 95% of the Jewish population in the world today, do not have a single drop of Shemitic blood in them. The fact is, most Ashkenazim are descended from 3 genomes, from the Judahites. Japheth was the brother of Shem, so a Japhethite cannot be a Shemite. And the Mongols and the Turks, who were part of the, I should put it this way, the Hittite kingdom that migrated north, who were absorbed by the Turkish Empire in early times. Okay, so we have the Japhethites, the Mongols, and the Hittites, also known as Turks. Those 3 genomes make up the Ashkenazi people, and there's no Shemitic blood in those people whatsoever. And I'm going to quote from Jewish authors and other historians that this is indeed a fact. For example, this in Titus, let's start with the Bible. Titus 1, verses 13 through 15. This witness is true, wherefore rebuke them sharply, that they may be sound in the faith. And of course he's talking about the Israelites, because the entire Bible is written to Israel. It's not written to the Jews or to any other people. Not giving heed to Jewish fables. So we're not to believe Jewish fables and commandments of men, which is a direct reference to the Pharisees who made up their own commandments in opposition to the laws of Yahweh, the law of God, that turned from the truth. Unto the pure all things are pure, but unto them that are defiled, and he's referring to the Pharisees here, and unbelieving is nothing pure, but even their mind and conscience is defiled. So this is what Paul is saying about these Pharisees who invented the religion called Judaism. And we'll bring this out later on, that Judaism is not the religion of the Old Testament. Judaism is actually a recently invented religion just before the days of Christ. And this is what Paul is trying to tell us, that these people have a defiled conscience and that their traditions are the traditions of men, they're not the traditions of the Bible. Okay? In his book, The Outline of History, H.G. Wells tells us, quote, "It is highly probable that the bulk of the Jews' ancestors never lived in Palestine at all, which witnesses the power of historical assertion over fact." What is H.G. Wells trying to tell us? Well, what I just explained, that the Jewish people, the Ashkenazi Jews, none of their ancestors ever lived in Palestine. None of their ancestors are Hebrews, Shemites, Judahites, or Israelites. They are completely different people who adopted the religion of Judaism around 740 AD. But to convert to a religion does not convert your genetics or your DNA from one group to another. People, Judeo-Christians ask me, well, what difference does all this make? What difference does it make if the Jewish people aren't really Israel at all? Well, the fact is that the Jewish claim to the land of Palestine and the genocidal tactics that they're using against the Palestinian people and the wars they're making in the Middle East based on their claim to the territory from the river of Egypt to the Tigris and Euphrates, namely Eretz Israel, as the Jews call it, it's a fraud. Since those people are not even Israelites, what they're doing in the Middle East is totally illegitimate. It's part of the great deception that we find in Revelation 12:9, which tells us that there is a beast that will deceive the whole world. Now, I have never found a Judeo-Christian minister to even address that verse as to who it might be or what it might be that's deceiving the entire world. Well, if the Jews are claiming to be Israel and they're not, well, they're deceiving the entire world with that lie. From Missing Links Discovered in Assyrian Tablets, a book by E. Raymond Capt, he says, "A great majority of the Jews today are Semites only in speech," which means that the fact that they still speak Hebrew, that some of them speak Hebrew, which is, even that is only a modern version of ancient Hebrew. The Bible is written in Paleo-Hebrew, and the modern Jewish version of it is completely different, and it's hard to say whether they're actually pronouncing the words correctly or putting their sentences correctly together. It's modern Hebrew. It's not the same as the Hebrew that was employed to write the Bible. Okay? Now, Professor A.N. Polyak of Tel Aviv University has this to say. This would mean, since the Ashkenazi people are not Israelites, this would mean that their ancestors came not from the Jordan, but from the Volga. Not from Canaan, but from the Caucasus, because they occupied southern Russia in 740 AD when they converted to Judaism. Once believed to be the cradle of the Aryan race, well, it was earlier the cradle of the Aryan race, and that genetically they are more related to the Hun, Uyghur, and Magyar tribes than to the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Let me repeat this. If all of this stuff about the Ashkenazi Jews is true, and it is, this would mean that their ancestors came not from the Jordan, but from the Caucasus, from the Volga, and that genetically they are more related to the Hun, Uyghur, and Magyar tribes than to the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Again, this is Professor A.N. Polyak Tel Aviv University. I'd like to point out a book that has created a sensation in the Jewish world, and I'm not so sure that the Judeo-Christian world has taken notice of it. They probably haven't because, as I said, they don't seem to care who is posing as Israel and who really is Israel. But Shlomo Sand, The Invention of the Jewish People. This book, and there's other books that have been written like this lately, that talk about the fact that the Ashkenazi people are not Israelites at all, that their origin is in a non-Israelite people in southern, southeastern Europe, the steppes of Central Asia, from Eastern Europe into Western Asia. That's where they actually originate from. Tex Mars, in his newsletter, The Power of Prophecy, talks about, this is the April 2013 issue, talks about the study that was done in Johns Hopkins University that showed that the DNA of the Jewish people is not the same as the DNA of the Israelite people. Okay? Now let me quote here. This is a headline. DNA science confounds the common wisdom. There's only one problem for the Jews here, and it is a huge one. Science proves that those who call themselves Jews are not Jews, or not Judahites, or Israelites is the proper way to say this. DNA science has confounded the Christian evangelicals by proving conclusively that most of the people in the nation of Israel and in world Jewry are not the descendants of Abraham. Those living today who profess to be Jews are not of the ancient Israelites, and they are not the seed of Abraham. In fact, the new DNA research shows that the Palestinians actually have more Israelite blood than the Jews. The nation of Israel today is populated with 7.5 million imposters. I couldn't have said it better myself. Next headline. The Jews are not Jews, but are Khazarians. All right, the Jews are not Judahites, is the correct way to say this, but are Khazarians. The newest DNA science finding is from Dr. Aaron El-Hayek, who is a Jew, and associates at the McKusick-Nathans Institute of Genetic Medicine, Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, in research accepted December 5, 2012, and published by the Oxford University Press on behalf of the Society of Molecular Biology and Evolution. It was found that the Khazarian hypothesis is scientifically correct. What does that mean? Simply stated, it holds that the Jewry genome, that is their genetic code, is a mosaic of ancestries which rise primarily out of the Khazars. Jews are Khazars, not Israelites. Next paragraph. The Jews of America, Europe, and Israel are descendants not of Father Abraham, but of King Bulan and the people of ancient Khazaria. Khazaria was an amalgam of Turkic clans who once lived in the Caucasus, or that is southern Russia, in the early centuries of the Christian era. These Turkic peoples were pagans who converted to Judaism in the 8th century. As converts, they called themselves Jews, but none of their blood comes from Israel. Let me repeat this last sentence. None of their blood comes from Israel. So, what difference does it make if these modern-day Jews are Israel or not? Well, if they're not Israel, they have no claim to Palestine. It's just that simple. The entire operation, that is the so-called return of the Jews to Palestine, is a patently obvious fraud if they are not the Israel of the Bible. Alfred Lilienthal, in his book, The Zionist Connection 2, puts it this way. And without the hue and cry, namely anti-Semitism, because the Jews always cry anti-Semitism if you criticize any aspect of their theology and propaganda. Without the hue and cry of anti-Semitism, pray what happens to the Zionist movement. In other words, if you criticize them, they shout you down with insults and call you an anti-Semite when they themselves are not even Semites. The Khazar conversion was not unique. Who can say for sure that many Christian readers of this book might not in fact have a better claim which they do not choose to exercise, to go back home to Palestine than Hanish Shimmer, Menachem Begin, or Golda Meir. So Mr. Lilienthal is actually conceding that we Caucasians have a better claim to Palestine than the Jews do. The Jewish Encyclopedia tells us this. This is 1925 edition, volume 54, page 41. Edom is in modern Jewry. What does that mean? Well, it tells us that the Jews know that in addition to Ashkenazi blood, they have Edomite blood flowing through their veins. And that's going to be the major subject of this video series here. And Luke 12:1, which tells us, beware the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. Because Judaism is the religion of the Pharisees. It's not the religion of Moses. It's a complete fraud, having nothing to do with the religion of Moses. Although the Jewish Pharisees, that is today's rabbis, claim that their religion is based on the laws of Moses, but they do not obey the laws of Moses. They break the laws of Moses constantly while pretending to obey them. So, let me quote a couple more scholars. This is Rabbi Ben Zion Boxer, B-O-K-S-E-R, in his book, Judaism and the Christian Predicament. He says this: this is not an uncommon impression, and one finds it sometimes among Jews as well as Christians, that Judaism is the religion of the Hebrew Bible. Okay, this is a very common impression. That's what most people believe, right? Remember, Revelation 12:9 says the beast will deceive the whole world. Everybody believes this, except those of us in Christian identity. We know better. He says, it is, of course, a fallacious impression. And he states this offhandedly as if everybody knows it. It is, of course, he says, a fallacious impression. Judaism is not the religion of the Bible. Let me repeat that. Judaism is not the religion of the Bible. Well, if it's not the religion of the Bible, whose religion is it? Well, the Universal Jewish Encyclopedia tells us whose religion it is. Quote, the Jewish religion as it is today traces its descent without a break through all the centuries from the Pharisees. Their leading ideas and methods found expression in a literature of enormous extent, of which a very great deal is still in existence. The Talmud is the largest and most important single member of that literature. So, not only are the Jewish people a fraud when they claim to be Israel, but their whole religion is a fraud when they claim that it is based on the laws of Moses, which it is not. It is based on the commentaries of the rabbis who composed the Talmud over the last 2,000 years. But that composition was already an oral tradition in the days of Christ, where Jesus Christ himself told the Pharisees, quote, you have made the law of none effect by your traditions. He also said, that's Matthew chapter 15, verse 5. He also said, if you had believed Moses, you would believe me. So it's very obvious that Jesus Christ understood that these Jews, these rabbis, the authors of the religion of Judaism, were preaching a new religion, completely new religion, using the Old Testament as a, how should I put it, a false reference, because they only pretend to obey the Torah while they actually practice the Talmud. So there's a big difference between practicing the laws of Moses and practicing your own traditions while running around the world claiming that you're actually obeying Moses when you are not. Rabbi Moshe M. Magal, President, National Jewish Information Service, in a letter dated 21st August 1961, says this: you will notice the great difference between the Jewish and Christian religions. But these are not all. We consider the two religions so different that one excludes the other. One excludes the other. There is no such thing as Judeo-Christianity. That's just another part of the gigantic fraud of Judaism today, pretending that there's some similarity between the two religions. You can't deny Christ and accept him at the same time. Jesus said, you're either for me or against me. And if you're against him, you cannot have a Judeo against Christian for religion. You can't be for him and against him at the same time. So if you're a Judeo-Christian, you are very confused. You're a very confused person. And you need to get rid of that Judeo label entirely. We emphasize, quote, that there is no such thing as a Judeo-Christian religion. There is not any similarity between the two concepts. Again, Rabbi Moshe M. Magal, president of the National Jewish Information Service. From the 1980 Jewish Almanac, an article entitled A Brief History of the Terms for Jew says this, quote, strictly speaking, it is incorrect to call an ancient Israelite a Jew, or to call a contemporary Jew an Israelite or a Hebrew. Pure admission of the fact that the Jewish people, as we know them today, are not Israelites or Hebrews. A Jew is not an Israelite or a Hebrew. So why is it that the entire world believes the opposite? It's because Talmudism, which is the Jewish religion, has been deceiving the entire world for the last 2,100 years. So what are we going to do about this situation? The truth has to come out. The world has to understand who the Jews really are. And we just went through proofs, many by Jewish authors themselves, admitting that the Jewish people are not the Israel of the Old Testament. They're not Hebrews. They're not Shemites. They're imposters. That's the fact of the matter. And in Revelation chapter 2, I'm going to quote Revelation chapter 2, verse 9. And he's speaking to Israel here, because the entire book of the Bible is written to the Israelites, not to the Jews. Verse 9, I know thy works and tribulation, he's speaking to Israel, and poverty. But thou art rich, because we have a rich heritage as Israel. And I know the blasphemy of them which say they are Jews, and are not, but are the synagogue of Satan. So those impostors who claim to be the Judahites and the Judeans of early Christian times, we're being told, remember, this is Jesus Christ dictating these words to John the Apostle, says, no, these Jews are imposters, and they are really the synagogue of Satan. Chapter 3, verse 9, behold, I will make them the synagogue of Satan, which say they are Jews, and are not, but do lie. Behold, I will make them to come and worship before thy feet, and to know that I have loved thee. So in other words, he loves Israel, but the Jews, the synagogue of Satan, he will force them at some future point, because this is prophecy, to worship at our feet. In other words, the Jews will at some future date, and I think this is going to happen very quickly, that they will admit that we Caucasian Israelites are the true Israelites of the world, and that they are imposters. Because at the second coming, Jesus Christ is going to judge them as tares in Matthew chapter 13. And we'll get to that toward the end of this series. Revelation chapter 12, verse 9. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. So who was cast out of heaven? Lucifer. Lucifer was cast out of heaven, and his followers today are led by the rabbis of Judaism, because they are the authors of the greatest deceit in history. Not just historical deceit, economic deceit, religious deceit, media deceit. They control the media, which lies to us constantly about that Israeli state being peopled or populated by Israel, when in fact they are Ashkenazis and Sephardim. So I think we've answered the question, who are the Ashkenazi Jews? We're talking about up to 95% of the world's Jews today are Ashkenazi Jews, none of whom have a single ancestor in ancient Israel, none of them have a single Shemitic ancestor, none of them have a single Hebrew ancestor. They are a completely different group of people, as I pointed out. And Arthur Kessler, in his book, The 13th Tribe, goes into great detail as to their true ancestry, which is not biblical Hebrew ancestry at all. And I advise you, if you really want to study this subject, get that book, Arthur Kessler's The 13th Tribe, because that is the most detailed book on the subject. And although Shlomo Sand's material relatively well updates the material in Arthur Kessler's book. Okay? So, who are the Jewish people? Can the Jewish people make any legitimate claim to being the Israel of the Bible? Well, we've ruled out up to 95% of the Jews today. They have absolutely no claim to that land called Palestine. No Ashkenazi Jew can claim to have Israelite heritage. So they cannot say, we went to Palestine to reclaim our territory, to reclaim our country, to reclaim our land. They cannot say that because that's a lie. It is simply a lie. So, what's left? Who's left of the Jewish people? Well, it's the Sephardic Jews. Who are the Sephardic Jews? Well, their answer is, well, the Sephardic Jews are the Spanish Jews, or you could say Western Jews, the Jews of Western Europe. But those people did not arrive in Spain until around 800 AD with the Moors. They had to have lived somewhere else before then. And the reason why the Sephardic Jews give that brief, deceptive answer is because they don't want you to know that they're the descendants of the Sepharvaim of the Old Testament. And who are the Sepharvaim? They were a Canaanite tribe that originated in the vicinity of ancient Babylon. And that's why the Babylonian Talmud is called Babylonian, is because that priesthood is using Babylonian teaching, not Mosaic teaching, not Hebrew teaching. They're using Babylonian teaching. And once you understand these facts, as will be detailed after part 1, the introductory part that we're doing right here, as we get into greater and greater detail as to who these Sephardic Jews really are, and their origin not only in the Babylonian Canaanites, but in the Canaanites of ancient Canaan land, which the Israelites were told by Yahweh were their perpetual enemy. So the people today from the Middle East who call themselves Sephardic Jews are actually the enemies of ancient Israel, and they have not ceased to be the enemy of ancient Israel, because we, the Caucasian people, are the descendants of ancient Israel, and the Jews are the descendants of the Canaanites and Edomites of the Bible, as we're going to be demonstrating from this point on.